Hello friend, welcome back to Nightfall Tales. As the evening fell and the last rays of the sun painted the sky crimson, Edward, a young journalist, set out on a long drive. His mission was to report on an old case, one that most people even avoided mentioning. It was the case of Blackwood Forest, a place infamous for the fact that those who entered often never returned. Edward's story began when his editor at a local newspaper told him over the phone, "Greater than if you really want fame, then try to uncover the truth of Blackwood Forest." Hearing these words made his heart race. This was the greatest challenge in the world of journalism. But it was also true that a strange shadow always lingered over the land of Blackwood Forest. The locals claimed that a cursed legacy had haunted it for generations. As Edward neared the village, he noticed that the atmosphere was unlike any ordinary woodland. The air carried a heavy silence. The chirping of birds had vanished. It felt as if the forest itself was alive and waiting. Stopping at a small inn in the village, Edward asked an old man, "Greater than why is this forest so infamous? Why do people fear going there?" The old man's eyes held a terrible memory. Speaking slowly, he said, "Greater than sun, this land has drunk blood. Centurius, a woman, was burned alive here, Alice, accused of witchcraft. Her final screams can still be heard at night. They say her spirit has captured the entire forest. Whoever goes inside either returns insane or never comes back." Edward chuckled faintly at the words, but a strange heaviness settled in his heart. He wondered, are these just old folk tales, or is there a hidden truth behind them? That night, while sitting alone in his room writing in his diary, a cold gust of wind suddenly blew in through the window. At the same time, he heard what seemed like a woman whispering softly. The words weren't clear, but one sentence stood out. "Greater than go back." Startled, Edward shut the window and tried to convince himself it was only his imagination. Yet his pounding heartbeat refused to agree. The next morning, he grabbed his camera and notebook and set out toward Blackwood Forest. The dense shadows of the trees swallowed the sunlight whole. Inside, a damp and foul odor lingered like rotting corpses buried deep beneath the soil. As he walked further, Edward found an old, broken wooden cross half buried in the ground. Written across it, in what looked like blood, were the words, "Greater than do not come here." But Edward ignored it. A pressed on. Then suddenly saw a faint figure, a woman in white, standing between the trees. Edward called out, his voice trembling, "Greater than who's there?" The only reply was the whistling of the wind, and when he looked again, the woman was gone. In that moment, for the first time, Edward thought to himself, "Have I truly opened the door to a cursed forest?" Edward's footsteps echoed on the damp earth as he ventured deeper into Blackwood Forest. The air grew heavier with every step. A suffocating mist coiled around the trees, as if the woods were alive and shifting with his presence. He raised his camera, snapping pictures of the gnarled branches that twisted like skeletal hands reaching for the sky. The deeper he went, the more it felt as though the forest was swallowing him whole. No sound of life, no wind, no birds, only silence, thick and unnatural. Suddenly, he came across the remnants of an old stone well, covered in moss and vines. On its rim were strange carving symbols he didn't recognize. Ancient and unsettling. He leaned closer, pointing his flashlight down into the pit. The beam revealed nothing but endless blackness. Still, he could swear he heard faint whispers rising from below, as though voices were calling to him. He pulled back quickly, clutching his notebook to calm his nerves. Scribbling down what he saw, he muttered, "These markings, they look ritualistic. Maybe linked to Alice, the accused witch." As he closed his book, a sudden crack echoed behind him. A spoon, around, nothing. Just trees and fog. He exhaled in relief but then noticed something on the bark of a nearby tree. Claw marks. Long, deep, and fresh. Edward reached out, touching the grooves. The wood was splintered as if ripped by something inhumanly strong. His hand trembled. He stepped back only to see movement in the fog, a shadow, tall and slender, gliding between the trees. "Hey!" he called out, forcing courage into his voice. "Who's there?" The shadow paused. Then, Without warning, it melted into the mist and vanished. Edward's heart pounded in his chest. He told himself it had to be his imagination, yet something inside him whispered otherwise. As dusk began to fall, he stumbled upon the ruins of an old cabin, its wooden walls rotting and half collapsed. He pushed the door open. The hinges screamed in protest. Inside, the smell of mildew and decay struck him like a wave. Broken furniture lay scattered across the floor. Cobwebs hung from the rafters like torn curtains. On a dusty table, he found a small leather-bound journal. Its cover was cracked with age. He opened it carefully. The handwriting inside was jagged and frantic. She comes at night. Her eyes burn like fire. I hear her whispering in my sleep. The forest belongs to her now. Edward turned the page. More entries, each one more disturbing than the last. The screams don't stop. They echo through the trees. She wants blood. A sudden bang rattled the cabin. The door slammed shut on its own. Edward froze. The temperature dropped sharply, his breath visible in the air. The faint sound of footsteps circled the cabin. Heavy, slow, deliberate. Edward grabbed his flashlight, aiming it toward the doorway. Nothing. Just silence. Then out of the corner of his eye he caught movement, a pale figure standing outside the broken window. A woman. Dressed in white, her face hidden by long, black hair. Edward's body locked in terror. He blinked and she was gone. The silence was broken by a whisper, a female voice, cold and sharp, slicing through the dark. Greater than leave, before it's too late. His chest tightened. He bolted from the cabin, stumbling back into the forest. His breaths came fast and shallow, panic clawing at him. Yet he forced himself onward, determined to uncover the truth. Night had now fully claimed the forest. The moonlight barely pierced the thick canopy above. Shadows twisted unnaturally, and the trees seemed to close in tighter with every step. Suddenly, he stumbled upon a clearing. In the center stood a massive oak tree, older than time itself. Its bark was blackened, as though scarred by fire. Around its roots were scattered bones, or perhaps human. Edward raised his camera, snapping photos after photo. His flash illuminated the scene in harsh bursts of white, and in one of those flashes he saw her. The woman in white, standing at the base of the oak, staring directly at him. Her face was pale, hollow, with eyes burning a faint crimson. Her lips moved soundlessly, but Edward didn't need to hear the words. He knew she was the cursed Alice. Edward's hands trembled as he lowered the camera. His voice cracked as he whispered to himself. God, what have I walked into? The wind howled through the trees, carrying with it a chorus of faint screams that seemed to come from every direction. Edward realized, with bone-deep dread, that the villagers had been right all along. Blackwood Forest wasn't just haunted, it was cursed, and now it had him. Edward stood frozen before the cursed oak, his breath visible in the icy air. The woman in white, which they called Alice, stood only a few steps away. Her crimson eyes glowed faintly in the darkness, but behind the fire, there was sorrow. His instincts told him to run. Every bone in his body screamed to escape. Yet something deeper kept him rooted in place. He raised his trembling voice. Who are you? Really? The wind died. The forest fell still. And then she spoke. Her voice wasn't a whisper this time. It was clear, heavy, with grief. Greater than I was Alice. I was a daughter, a healer. They called me a witch because I knew the herbs of the earth. Feared me, so they burned me. Edward felt his throat tighten. The image of a woman condemned, fire consuming her, filled his mind. The journal's frantic words suddenly made sense. This wasn't just a curse, it was a wound, one that had bled for centuries. Alice's form flickered like a flame, her white gown flowing unnaturally in the mist. Greater than, for centuries I have wandered, feared, hated, No one has seen me as human until ye. Edward's fear cracked into something unexpected. He lowered his camera, letting it fall against his chest. His voice was gentle now. I see you, Alice. Not as a monster, not as a curse, but as someone who suffered injustice. Her eyes softened, the crimson glow fading into a deep, aching sadness. For the first time, Edward noticed tears glistening on her pale face. She stepped closer, her presence cold yet strangely tender. Why do you not run? She asked, her voice trembling. Edward swallowed hard, his heartbeat pounding. Because maybe what you've been waiting for is someone who doesn't run. The forest shuddered around them, the mist pulling back as though holding its breath. Alice's hand, cold as winter, reached toward his cheek. When her fingers touched him, 1,000 voices screamed through the tree's butt. Edward didn't flinch. Instead, he whispered, "You're not alone anymore." Alice closed her eyes, leaning into his touch, as if tasting humanity for the first time in centuries. The red fire in her gaze dimmed to nothing. The forest fell silent, and then her body began to dissolve into mist, her voice breaking into a final whisper. Greater than thank you for seeing me. Edward reached out desperately, trying to hold her, but his hands grasped only air. She was gone. The mist lifted. The forest seemed lighter, as if released from its curse. Edward collapsed to his knees beneath the ancient oak. His camera lay forgotten in the dirt. Tears blurred his vision. He had come to chase a story. Instead, he had touched the heart of a soul trapped in endless torment. The villagers would never believe what he had seen. But it didn't matter. Alice wasn't a legend anymore. To him, she was real. And though she was gone, Edward knew a part of her would forever remain with him.